the living God in our bodies. No light with darkness, okay? Righteousness with lawlessness. We don't need to be mixing things here. So it is 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul starts it off like this. Since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. Now, look, guys, we don't got to be scared of God. That's not what we're talking about here. Let me check this out, okay? In the Message version, it says this: with promises like this to pull us on, my dear friends, let's make a clean break from everything that defiles or distracts us, both within and without. Let's make our entire lives fit and holy temples for the worship of God. So know who you are and then live like it. Know who you are and live like it. What kind of promises do we have? My goodness. Paul's joy is listed here, and he says this: make room in your hearts for us. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have taken advantage of no one. I do not say this to condemn you, for I said before that you are in our hearts, to die together and to live together. And I am acting with great boldness towards you. I have great pride in you. I am filled with comfort. In all our affliction, I am overflowing with joy. And he says right here, trust us, we've never hurt a soul. We've never exploited or taken advantage of yours. And don't think that I'm finding fault with you. I told you earlier that I am with you all the way. No matter what, I have, in fact, the greatest confidence in you. If only you knew how proud I am of you. I am overwhelmed with joy despite all of our troubles, right? He's been through it. Paul says, for even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest. Think of just the brutal circumstances it took for Paul to get around. Our bodies had no rest. We were afflicted at every turn, fighting without and fear within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not only by his coming, but also the comfort with which he was comforted by you, as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced still more. For even if I made you grieve with my letter, I do not regret it, though I did regret it, for I see that the letter grieved you, though only for a little while. Remember that letter, guys? Remember 1 Corinthians? Paul was being bold. He had to correct so many people in the church, okay? They were judging each other. They were eating and drinking like crazy at the Lord's Supper. They were just acting wild, no different than the pagan culture all around them. And Paul had to straighten them out with a letter. And he said, I didn't write that to grieve you, but my goodness, I see that it did. Thankfully, only for a little while. As it is, I rejoice, but not that you were grieved, but because you were grieved into repenting. For you felt a godly grief, so that you suffered no loss through us, right? I know I distressed you greatly with my letter. And although I felt awful at the time, I don't feel bad now that I see how it all turned out. The letter upset you, but only for a while. And now I'm glad. Not that you were upset, but that you were jarred into turning things around. You let the distress bring you to God, not drive you from him. The result was all gain and no loss. That's a great way of putting it. There's a famous phrase right here. 2 Corinthians 7, chapter 10. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. Now, guys, you could see sometimes the word salvation is used interchangeably throughout the scriptures. We've got that one-time deal on the cross when we all died and Jesus Christ rose again and he took us with him. That's salvation. But now he's talking about our living, our day-to-day life, decisions we make. And he's saying right here, godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, guys. In other words, walking by the Spirit is going to lead to peace and life. And walking by the flesh or worldly is going to produce death, okay? For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you. Now he's hyping them up. Look at this, guys. Look at the changes you have made because of this godly grief. But also what eagerness to clear yourselves, what indignation, what fear, what longing, what zeal, what punishment. At every point you have proved yourselves innocent in the matter. So although I wrote to you, it was not for the sake of the one who did wrong, nor for the sake of the one who suffered the wrong. But I wrote in order that your earnestness for us might be revealed to you in the sight of God, and therefore we are comforted. Here's what it says in the Mirror version. I love this. It says, to anchor one's thoughts in God's thoughts when faced with difficult or painful experiences, it brings escape from sorrow, and it leaves one with no regrets. But, oh, what a dreadful contrast is the religious system, which adds regret upon the sorrow. Whereas the one brings such immediate relief, the other seems to be an inescapable death trap. There is a spirit-filled way and a religious-filled way here, as what Paul's talking about, okay? Now, religion is going to focus on guilt and shame and all that you have done wrong. It's going to be very sin-conscious. But the gospel is going to be focusing on your innocence, your blamelessness, your holiness, your perfection in Jesus. And when you get your mind on Christ and you get your mind on your true identity, godly sorrow brings a repentance that leads to that salvation in your daily lives, the daily decisions you make. That's what we're talking about here. And so it says this in the Mirror version, verse number 11, consider how this very thing that caused you such initial grief, the letter, has turned your attention to God. So see how this correction from Paul, he's pointing out that, see, you could have ran away from this, but ultimately you leaned more into God. You turned towards God. It revived an immediate sense of urgency to realize your position in grace. Almost like when your arm is twisted and locked behind your back, and your own efforts to clear and save yourself are completely neutralized. You were greatly alarmed, with an intense desire and burning zeal to re-endorse the basis of your righteousness. And so in everything, your blameless innocence is vindicated. Really great perspective right there. And so it says this, and besides our own comfort, we rejoiced still more at the joy of Titus. Now Titus has joined the party, and we're going to read Titus later on, because his spirit has been refreshed by you all. So now they're seeing the Corinth church, the people in Corinth, they're coming together, things are getting better, their behaviors are getting in line, they're living in step with the gospel message that Paul has presented, and it is, what does it say here? It's refreshing everyone in the spirit. For whatever boasts I made to him about you, I was not put to shame. You see that? Paul must have been hyping up these people to Titus, and he's saying, you lived up to my expectations. I told him you were blameless and innocent and perfect, and guess what, guys? You didn't let me down. Thank you, John. You didn't let me down. I was not put to shame. But just as everything we said to you was true, so also our boasting before Titus has proved to be true. So you see how that works? He corrects them. He lets them know their identity. And he leaves them with a message. Hey, you are blameless and holy and righteous, and you're just like Jesus on the inside. And one died for all, which means that all died. And then one rose again, which means all were raised. Those who now live for Christ. Okay? So he's giving them this gospel message, guys. Remember. And then he leaves them with that, and he goes to Titus, and he says, I'm telling you, they are blameless and perfect and holy, regardless of their behavior. right? Paul knows their true identity. And he's going and he's telling Titus about their real identity. And guess what so happens? Titus shows up. He doesn't know what to expect, but the Corinth church is getting things together. And Paul was not put to shame, as he says. They were proving that what he said was true, and they're proving that what they said to Titus was true as well. And his affection for you is even greater, as he remembers the obedience of you all, how you received him with fear and trembling. I rejoice because I have complete confidence in you. What a tone change from Paul. Remember how bold and harsh he was? Then he said he was going to come to see him in person. He was all fired up, guys. And now look at him. He's rejoicing because he has complete confidence in them. I'm going to read the last verse from the Message here. And it says this: it was wonderful to see how revived and refreshed Titus was by everything you did. If I went out on a limb in telling Titus how great I thought you were, you didn't cut that limb off. As it turned out, I wasn't exaggerating one bit. Titus saw for himself that everything I said about you was true. He can't quit talking about it, goes over it again and again. The story of your obedience, your prompt obedience, and the dignity and the sensitivity of your hospitality. He was quite overwhelmed by it all, and I couldn't be more pleased. I'm so confident and proud of you. Guys, if there's any lesson to take away from 2 Corinthians chapter 7, it is how important knowing your identity is. When you know who you are on the inside, it will affect the way you think, the way you talk, the way you act, the way you see other people, the way you see yourself. And it will all come into line. The way of your being will line up with the way you act. There will be wholeness, okay? When the way you are lines up with how you are, there's wholeness. And that's what Paul's preaching. You're holy, righteous, blameless, guys. You're just like Jesus on the inside. Remember, our bodies are temples of the living God. He lives in us. Who does? Jesus. What's Jesus like? Well, you can start getting into it. He's creative, and he's honest, and he's powerful, and he's got a pure heart, and he's righteous, and all these other things. Well, we are the same inside because of what Christ did on that cross for us. And when you renew your mind to this identity, guys, it's going to affect your life. You're going to behave in a more peaceful and profound way because you're going to be led by the Spirit. So that wraps 2 Corinthians chapter 7, guys. Short, sweet,